Hello, I'm Rod Garvin, SVP of Talent Insights for the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. I also serve as Executive Director of the CLT Alliance Foundation. Today joining me is Kelley Cornish. She's SVP and the Strategy and Integration Leader for Enterprise Diversity and Inclusion at Wells Fargo. She's also the author of How Will You Show Up, which shares professional, personal, and practical advice for navigating the workplace and your career. Kelley, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Rod. I'm excited to be here and to have a conversation with you. Thanks.
Awesome. Great to meet in this virtual format, and we'll meet in person at some point when the situation allows. So
Absolutely.
Really good to have you. As you know, Kelley, the work that you do in diversity, equity, and inclusion is more important than ever, given what's currently happening in our country and our world. The recent deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, and countless others has given rise to new attention on issues of racial equity and racial injustice. We're seeing a push for change that we haven't seen before. I'm really encouraged by the way in which the business community is weighing in really an unprecedented way. We've never seen businesses be so direct in terms of their communication and language around race and racism and anti-Black racism in particular. So that gives me hope, especially being a part of an economic development organization that's really focused on, growing business here, bringing new business to the Charlotte region, and making sure that everyone gets the benefit from our economic growth and what we call prosperity for all. So really appreciate you being here. Before we really get into your role and what Wells Fargo is currently doing, just wanted to, give you an opportunity to share any personal thoughts you have, as you think about the situation from a personal perspective, and even in terms of, conversations you're having with your family. How are you all processing what's happening right now?
Yeah, Rod, thanks. It's a really interesting time for someone like myself, who this has been my life's work since graduating from college really early. It literally, people look at me when I say this, but it literally has been 32 years in the workforce, all around D&I. Before we even had the conversation of D&I, it was around EEO, affirmative action, civil treatments, and then as we evolve into diversity and inclusion, to this moment in time is truly, as you said earlier, it's unprecedented. We've seen, and weren't there, but my parents were there on the front lines in the 60s, and this is the movement. This is, I would say, there have been sightings of a movement prior, but this is truly the movement. And I think what's so different about this is that it's global. It's not just a US conversation. We've literally, and someone who really has a heart for the global work around this, to see the protests going on in London, in Germany, Australia, just people are really serious about this and what that means to a group of people, Black African-American people in this country. So, as I lean into this even more, and I must say, when all of this happened, really when the floodgates opened, because let's be clear, we've known it's been happening. We've seen it happen. We've seen videos before. This isn't something new. It's just this moment in time has been elevated like no other. And I'm happy about that. Unfortunate at the hands of, with someone who lost their life. But when I think about what that has done to really amplify this conversation, it's everything a D&I practitioner has been asking for forever, right? So to some it's new, to others it's like finally, and I must admit, a piece of you is like, you're totally exhausted. You're like, wow, we made it across that finish line. Now you've got to get a new energy to help fulfill all of the stuff that's in front of you. So those are my thoughts right now.
Appreciate that. I think, you may agree with this. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is really kind of ebbed and flowed as a priority within many organizations. It seemed that we were making some progress, and more recently, even within the past couple of years, it seems that it was becoming de-emphasized. It seems that, we weren't really able to have this conversation about diversity and inclusion, particularly as it pertains to race. Sometimes gender, sometimes even sexual orientation in other areas, but this issue of racism was becoming taboo. And we do find ourselves in this moment where we're able to not only have the conversation, but push for change. So I'm hoping that we realize, we live up to the potential of the moment and the true movement, as you say. Kelley, thinking about your role at Wells Fargo, please share what your day looks like. How do you spend your time as a diversity and inclusion leader at Wells Fargo?
Well, Ron, I will say it's very different today than it was 2 months ago. So I'll go, but before the civil unrest within our country, we were really focused on, and I'm just going to be totally honest, because I think other organizations would fall in this bucket. It was very programmatic. The conversation was very programmatic, very compliance focused around making sure we were addressing gaps, making sure we had diverse slates, making sure we were leveraging, diverse suppliers. And honestly, here, like other places, sometimes those conversations were hard to get on the calendar. They were hard to get on the calendar, right? We would get them there, we would land, but it was a lift. And again, it's not just at Wells. I think in other organizations, we would see movement in pockets. Like, we had the Me Too movement a couple of years ago, so we leaned into gender. Last year in this country, World Pride was here, so LGBT was huge focus. I feel like this year is the movement around Black African American, but what's different, like I said, is taking a global conversation. And we see it because we look at someone's human rights, which is completely, invaded around just trying to live every day. So today, what it looks like is 12 and 14-hour days for the D&I consultants that are on my team. I have 8 of them that cover the globe with 270,000 employees, and so they're tired. They're tired. It's a lot of conversations that we probably should have had 10 years ago that we're just starting to have. And in them, they're highly emotional, highly charged. It's not one day that goes by and one experience around conversation that someone's not in tears. And so you have that emotional piece, while at the same time, a part of you, if you live this world and you're in this world and you're Black and African American in corporate America, you actually want to see something happen because you're almost afraid that it could go away. Like, right. Is this like, do we need to seize this moment and not be able to deal with our reality too? So I do have a majority of my team are Hispanic or African American. So we are really, trying to live this as well, and then hold up an organization. So that's what's different in the day-to-day work. All of that being said, leaders are on point like never before. They're just on point like never before. They want to go in, they want to understand, they want information, and that is refreshing. That's refreshing. So I call it, faith drives me. I call it the weight of a blessing. And so it's truly been this blessing for us that's very weighty. And we've got to figure out day to day how we'll operationalize in the current state.
Loved how you frame that. It's a form of ministry, if you will, right?
Yeah.
It's spiritual work, it's emotional work, it's psychological. Not only the time, those long days, and many of us are getting more familiar in this whole, pandemic environment that we're in.
Right.
We've learned that working from home just means working longer hours and working harder.
Right. Yes,
So,
absolutely.
for those, I think for African Americans, Latino, and Hispanic individuals, Black and Brown folk in particular, and then those who do the work, there's an additional psychological and emotional tax. And I appreciate you sharing that because I think it's important for people to know, even in terms of, how you try to support your coworkers who may be
Right.
Black and Brown, and understanding, sometimes, we may want to have the conversation. Sometimes we may need to take a pause, so
Right.
just being mindful and sensitive of those issues is really important. I want to kind of continue with that, Kelley, in terms of, I know you all are having some conversations. What else are you all doing and thinking about as it relates to supporting Black and Brown employees, and really just kind of fostering a culture of inclusiveness as it relates to where we are and where you want to go as an organization?
Yeah, I can say the culture at Wells Fargo has always been engaging around this topic. I mean, we have what we call team member networks, that some would call them employee resource groups, that are always on top of something, right? And and it's truly people that are passionate about a cause, or many feel that this is the human side of the work. So we never have a lack. And I would say in other organizations I've been in, people have always been truly engaged in the conversations, the events, the socializing. It's a safe place to come together. So what I see now is, considering you raised a good point, we are in COVID, with that piece, and everyone has heard it said, in the Black African American community, is two pandemics going on right now, right? COVID and racism.
I like to talk about it that way too. Yes.
Absolutely. Racism, we've been in this pandemic for 400 years. So it's been weighty. Then you put COVID on top of it. And to your point, Black and Brown people, and the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on them, whether they're frontline workers, in healthcare, for us to be a small portion of the country with such a large impact just speaks volumes. So we were wrestling with that first. And we had started some conversation. Someone on my team did a great job of pulling together some content, and she called it Same Storm, Different Boats. So we're all in this storm, but it depends on what boat you're in, on how you're dealing with it. So we had started those conversations that were taken off like wildfire around privilege, and who has what when it comes to working from home and access and childcare and all of that, and whose children are behind. And so then this happened, around the civil unrest and our racial tensions and everything. And so we opened up that. So we were actually able to take some learning and really push that forward, and then literally build in real time other tools. And we brought a lot in from the outside. It's some great things. It is not a day that you can't go by, that will go by, that you cannot find a webcast or new content or something that's out there. And so we're really leveraging that. When it comes to supporting our Black African American employees, really seriously, I think what the leaders are really doing is just allowing them to use their voice, allowing them. And it's so funny. I was telling my husband at the beginning of this year, I said, if I could write a book right now, it would be something around, if I could say what I really wanted to say, it would be that book. That would be the title, right? Well, didn't have to write it, it's here, So literally they're allowing people to say what they really want to say. And in that, it's a sense of relief, but it's also a burden that comes with that. So I think the immediate thing we're doing is allowing more dialogue, and it's continuing, going deep into the organization. And then we're also looking at our infrastructure, our processes, our hiring, our diverse slates, our promotions. Literally, Wells Fargo, like other organizations, are saying it doesn't have to be, you almost need to hack the current system and break it down and build it back up so you can find those biases that exist within the system. And so that's where we are. That's the journey we're on right now. And our CEO is committed to an additional resource that directly reports into him to look at it not just from a talent perspective, but also a business. What are we doing around our products and services? How do we need to go deeper within this community to be on the right side of all of this and to make things right? So those are just a few things we're doing right now.
That's great perspective, Kelley. And, before we started recording, you and I joked about a few friends I have over at Wells Fargo, and, a few in the diversity and inclusion space. And I've long been a fan, a big admirer of what Wells Fargo does. I really think you all are best in class. We all know it's a journey. We never quite arrive, but the strategy and framework that Wells Fargo has created is truly impressive. I recently read about something new, a new policy that the CEO is enacting, and that's around factoring diversity, equity, and inclusion into executive compensation. I thought that was a very strong, tangible step. Can you share any thoughts around how you all have arrived at that particular decision?
Honestly, I can say that what I've learned, I came a couple of months before Charlie, and he is truly on this mission to right the ship of Wells Fargo. And when all of this happened over the past couple of months, he immediately went into what I feel is problem-solving mode with empathy and understanding, because he was listening. You could tell he was listening as the CEO. And the calls that I was on with him, he was like, I'm here to listen. I need to learn too. And so a lot of people shared with him. And he also brought in people from the outside to give him some perspective. And literally, I think he very quickly sized up the situation as a CEO would do, look at where we have opportunity, look at where we have gaps, and said, this is a best practice we need to incorporate. And so to see it come really, from his pen outward was truly amazing, and it happened pretty quickly. We are still working out the details around that, but just I'm sure his direct reports are on notice, like the rest of the world knows. Like, okay, we've got to, and it will make a difference. I think about other organizations like Comcast and others who have been doing this for a number of years, and it has been tied to compensation, to their executive compensation. What I would say to companies who are really talking about this, where I've seen it play out really well, is not just about recruitment, but it's also the retention, the development, the promotion, all things D&I when it comes to your role as a leader. So I'm sure we're going to be looking at this from a holistic approach. That was one of many things he put out there around commitments that our teams go, okay, we've got to step up even higher to help, get this across the finish line. So really excited about it. And it's well overdue. It's well overdue. It's not a new practice, but it is a new practice to Wells.
That's awesome. Again, great step forward, and hopefully we'll see more organizations follow that path and adopt that as a best practice. Kind of continuing on lines of economics and finance, as Charlotte's leading economic development organization. We want to make sure that we're creating an equitable economy that promotes prosperity for all. I'm going to share just a few stats from our research team looking at some financial gaps. When we look at average wages for African-American workers, they're at about $33,700, and then $36,100 for Hispanic and Latino workers, compared to wages for whites, Asians, and Asian Americans. It's significantly higher. So white workers are currently at $50,800, and Asian American workers are $53,600. So, we know that there's economic disparities, but when you look at those numbers, it puts it in stark contrast. And we know this when we talk about kind of the historical context that is, led to the inequities and the injustices that we have in our criminal justice system, that also translates to our economic system, right? And even healthcare, and we look at other segments of society. Wells Fargo obviously is a global financial services institution, so you all are in kind of a unique position as not only an employer, but also an organization that is able to empower individuals from a financial and economic standpoint. So I want to look at this in a couple different ways. One, kind of from an internal standpoint, you referenced how you're looking at your hiring practices, how you're developing and promoting talent. What are some steps that you're considering now, as you do that internal evaluation? Again, I think you all have been ahead of the curve in a lot of ways, but what are you seeing as a pivot or something that might need to be done differently to truly make sure you're being equitable in how we hire diverse talent, Black and brown talent in particular, and how we support them once they're in the organization?
When I think about your question, it just really, it really brings this whole conversation around race, equity, social justice to full circle, right? It's truly full circle, because we know that money drives a community. At Wells, we have, whether it's consistently looking at pay structures, whether it's, the whole conversation that consistently sits with us around pay equity, where you're consistently looking at job categories and, job groups to see if there are some consistencies or inconsistencies there. That's ongoing. That's par for the course at Wells. Where we have opportunity, and I think this is what happens when people of color are in lower paid positions, you start to see this huge divide. And so I'm really pushing for it. And for years, people have been pushing for people of color to be elevated into higher roles. Let's be clear. People know a direct report to the CEO makes a lot more different. Their money looks different than someone levels 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 down, right? Everyone knows that. So it's not just about representation at the top of the house. It's an economic engine as well. Because then when you're there and you're at that level, and we can definitely go back to the jobs in the community that keep us together as glue. But when you think of from an organizational perspective and where they need to have more accountability, and what people are asking for is, where are we on these boards of directors that get paid? Where are we at the top of the organization with budgets that we're empowered to then get out and to be a part of the community like others are? Those are things that are a ripple effect of having people in very senior roles. So it's not just I'm sitting there because I'm a person of color. I actually have the benefits that go with that to help make a difference in my sphere of influence. So you've got that. And I think if we begin to see more of that, it will begin to trickle down and get into our communities and get into different job roles that are actually allowing people to make more money. So that's the sort of surgical approach that has to be taken to what do we do differently that will have a major impact on the communities that we live in. And that's one primary example. So those are some of the conversations that we're having. People on the front lines, it's also with them as well, getting them to a place where we can see them, we can help develop you, we can get you to that next level of what pay looks like. The higher up you go, everybody wants to be mentored, but at some point it's around sponsorship. That's something else that we're talking about. How do I have an amazing sponsor outside of Wells. He's been my sponsor for 15 years. He's the one that can get me in places I can't get in, but he knows that he's worked close enough with me that I'll knock it out of the park once I get there, whether it's on a board of directors, whether it's involved in something else, or a job that he wants to refer me to. So those are the things that we're saying that will help create systemic change in an organization that'll start at the top, push down, push down, push down, so we can see change. So, I could go on and on about processes, but I think it's in the processes where a lot of the unjust behaviors are happening, which are causing the ripple effect of what we see around economics. So that's sort of when we talk about the science of D&I and
Right.
really getting underneath and getting to the root cause of why we have disparities, why we have check cashing places in communities opposed to banks, why we have deserts, why we have, only, no knock against them, because I go to the dollar store, love them. But if that's the only place in your community where you can get food, that's a problem, right? So it's all of this that I think corporate America, now when we talk about an environmental impact, this is an environmental impact too. So those are just some thoughts and some conversations we're having at Wells, and then also other conversations I'm having with other D&I practitioners just globally about how do we change the process and really hack into the systems to make true change that will sustain.
Well, that's an incredible analysis, Kelley. Talking about the root causes, which we have to look at to truly create the systemic change.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you do that analysis, I'm sure the more you realize how complex
Yes,
the problem is,
yes.
right? and why it's so hard to create that change. But
mm-hmm.
we're doing that now in a way that we just weren't willing to before. And as an alliance of businesses across our region, we want to help share and translate that knowledge. So that's why we think it's so important for you and your team to be at the table. How do we get some of these strategies and best practices and tools into other organizations? And when we wrap up, I'm going to ask you for a few practical steps that organizations of all sizes can take. Just thinking externally, you provided some great internal perspective in terms of how you're approaching change. And you reference, some of the challenges with, limited financial resources in the broader community and, access to, healthy food and other items. What are some of the primary external relationships and partnerships that you all are engaged in right now, whether that be, through financial literacy and economic empowerment, or even, thinking about minority and women-owned business enterprises, anything you want to share from that standpoint?
Yes, we've had rich history in this space around philanthropy. Most recently, an outstanding rating, a CRA rating, which people in banking know that's what you strive for, and that really shows our commitment around small business, around financial literacy, how we're getting out in the community, and how we're educating and looking to help financially with small business, small and minority-owned businesses. So that's one avenue. Others, it's been more around philanthropy, and I think Wells, as well as other organizations, are now really asking themselves, what new partnerships do we need? We are, and the traditional ones that we've always supported the NAACP. We've always supported, the Urban League, UNCF, all of those HBCUs, HSIs. We're in there, whether it's our time, our talent, or our treasure. We're in there just helping people to learn about corporate America, sponsoring major events. Now, though, the conversation is shifting and people want more and something different. They want a laser-focused approach on what will you now do, what will you help finance to help combat racism. They're being very specific in the ask, and we're even looking at what are those organizations that we begin to wrap our arms around and partner with. So I say that to say, we are on this journey right now of discovery to figure out so many new organizations out there now, and understanding how to connect in with them and what does that look like that don't have a traditional infrastructure like the other organizations had. So that's something that I would say, the next 3 or 4 months, we probably can better define. But until then, as we go down this road, we'll continue to lean into the organizations we've supported in the past to make sure that we can, help them as much as we can. Another challenge with this is the race conversation is happening, but we just had COVID too, and we're still in COVID. And a lot of those organizations needed resources for that. So it's, corporate America is corporate America, but it's also a business. So you have to look at the business side on how we readjust from COVID, and then how we make good on our communities as well. So it's a very interesting time to be in corporate America, especially leading corporate America right now, because you're truly forced to decide who will we be on the other side of this. And those are not easy conversations. There's not a template, there's not a book, there's not a playbook, It's true conversation and ideation and innovation, and all of that is happening right now.
A daunting task, yet exciting, right? It's it's what fuels people like you and me, what gets us out of bed in the morning. So it's an exciting time to be in, despite the obstacles and challenges that we still face. Kelley, we've got a very diverse audience that we communicate with. There will be a number of entrepreneurs and small business owners, as well as leaders and employees of large corporations, thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion as a journey. For those on an organizational level, in particular, even an individual level, who are really just starting to put a strategy and framework together around DE&I, what are some practical steps that you might recommend, and also cost effective, given that, organizations are going to be at different places in terms of their, financial resources?
A couple of years ago, I did an article with Inc. magazine on this very topic, but we were looking at a toxic work environment and how are some ways you can kind of come up out of that, whether you're a really large organization or a small organization, one person, that's leading the work. So I would say a few things, and I'm getting calls every day about, we never had a diversity and inclusion department before, a director. Where do we start? Where do we go to find one? What should that person look like? I would say, if you're a smaller organization, even if you're a small business and you want to raise your voice in this space, sometimes it's really the basic things that you can lift and really expound on. So whether it's your current policies around EEO, affirmative action, sexual harassment, all of those, bring that back to the surface to help people understand we are committed to this. This has been embedded in our policies and procedures for a long time. It's now elevated, but it's not. And I think that what I'm afraid of is many people are looking for answers really, really quickly because the pressure is on, but they need to fall back and look at some inventory that might exist to see where we need to now tweak those areas that either the laws have changed or the thought has changed. The external environment is now asking for something different. We have people now that are calling and interviewing with us, asking us for that information. Like, they want to know, like, what is your policy on this? Do you have a policy on that? What does your workforce look like? Just questions we've never had asked before. So, if you're over 50 employees, then, you definitely have to adhere to the EEO affirmative action. What is your voice in that space? And really to make visible. I've seen some small businesses just put up signs when you come in, like, human rights, is for everyone, or just something to show that your voice is positive in this space. I would also say, if you don't have someone dedicated to this full time, you need to make the shift. A lot of organizations have been doing it off the side of their desk, where someone has been sharing the role as like an HR business partner and diversity specialist. now is the time. Commitment looks like, I'll show you what commitment looks like. It looks like saying we have a dedicated role, and we will look as our company grows, if you're a smaller company, to have that function continue to grow as the company grows. So those are some things right away that you don't have to, and it may be shifting a headcount from one, department to another if you can't afford it right now. So there's so many different ways that you can, or place someone on a professional assignment to help build this out and lift this for you. It's no reason why you cannot do it. And it's, again, so much information out there around how to run D&I with an office of one or something along those lines. And then the mega organizations, they're just reorganizing. They're taking what they have, looking at it again, really sifting through it to see what makes sense, where we need to come up higher, and where the gaps are, because we need to close those gaps now.
Great perspective, Kelley. No matter where you are on the journey or spectrum, you can start where you are. You can, as you said, reevaluate your existing policies and practices. What do we need to reframe in terms of our business model? What do we need to reframe in terms of our talent strategy? As you said, if you're over 50 employees, what do we need to do to make sure that we're compliant with EEOC? So there's a number of things that we can do, and we all have a role to play as individuals and organizations. Kelley, I really appreciated this conversation. Glad to have a new friend at Wells Fargo.
Absolutely.
And look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience with us. And I definitely look forward to talking with you again in the future.
Sounds great. Thank you for having me. And yes, the journey continues. I look forward to being on the journey with you and with your organization as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks again.
All right, take care.